The morning she was dismissed, Clara Fenwick stood in the great marble hall of Ellsworth Hall, with her whole life folded into a single valise, and she did not let herself weep. She had learned, in her 21 years, that weeping changed nothing. It had not brought back her mother, dead of a fever when Clara was 9. It had not softened the workhouse matron, nor the schoolmistress who took her in, only because she could add a column of figures faster than any girl in the county. So she stood very straight in her grey travelling dress, her chin lifted, her gloved hands closed one over the other, and she watched the dust motes turn slowly in the shafts of pale January light that fell through the tall windows. Behind her, on the landing, a small voice cried out, "Miss Fenwick, Miss Fenwick, don't go." It was Lady Beatrice, 6 years old, the Duke's daughter, running to the balustrade in her nightgown, with her red hair unbound and her cheeks blotched from crying. A nurse caught the child by the wrist before she could tumble down the stairs. Clara's heart clenched so hard she felt it in her throat, and for one traitorous instant she nearly ran to her. She did not. She could not. The order had come from the Duke himself, and one did not argue with the Duke of Ellsworth. "Be brave, my darling," Clara called up, and her voice held, though only just. "You know your letters now. You know the whole of the map of England. You will do beautifully. I don't want to do beautifully. I want you." The words struck Clara somewhere beneath the ribs. She pressed her lips together and made herself turn toward the door, where the butler, Mr. Grantham, waited with the grave patience of a man who had turned many people out of many doors and disliked all of it. She had been at Ellsworth Hall 4 months. 4 months of teaching a motherless child her sums and her sewing, of watching the great cold house from the schoolroom window, of glimpsing its master perhaps a dozen times and never once being spoken to directly. The Duke was a shadow at the end of corridors, a silhouette against the library fire, a name spoken low by the servants with something between fear and pity. His wife, the whispers said, had died 3 years past, though how, no one would tell her, and the manner of the telling always changed. And this morning, without warning, without a fault named, she had been let go. "Have I done something, Mr. Grantham?" she had asked, when the dismissal was delivered. "If I have given offence, I would know it, so that I might mend it wherever I go next." The old butler's face had softened. "You have done nothing, Miss Fenwick. His Grace does not always explain himself. It is not our place to ask." So there it was, nothing explained. A carriage waiting on the drive to carry her to the coaching inn, and from there, she did not know. A new post, if her references held. The workhouse, if they did not. She reached up, as she always did in moments of fear, and touched the locket at her throat. It was a small thing, oval, of tarnished gold, warm from her skin. It had been her mother's, and her mother's mother's before that, the only thing in all the world that had ever truly belonged to Clara. Inside, behind a sliver of cracked glass, was a lock of dark hair and half a miniature, a woman's face, painted in fading colours, cut cleanly down the middle, as though the other half had been torn away long ago. Clara had worn it every day of her life. She did not even feel it there anymore, no more than she felt her own pulse. She let it fall back against her collar, squared her shoulders, and stepped toward the great oak doors. And then a voice came down the hall, like the crack of ice on a winter pond. "Stop." She froze. Every servant in the hall froze. Even the dust seemed to hang still in the light. The Duke of Ellsworth stood at the foot of the grand staircase. She had never seen him this close. He was younger than the whispers had made him, perhaps 35, but there was nothing young in his face. It was a hard, handsome, guarded face, all sharp planes and shadow, with dark eyes that seemed to have forgotten how to soften. He wore black, as he always did. He had come down without his coat, in his shirt sleeves and waistcoat, as though he had crossed the house in haste, and his hair was disordered, and he was staring at her. No, not at her throat, at the locket. "Where?" he said, and his voice had gone strange and low. "Did you get that?" Clara's hand rose to cover it, without her willing it. My lord." He crossed the hall in 5 long strides, and stopped an arm's length from her, closer than any man of his rank had ever stood to her, so close She could see the muscle working in his jaw, and the way his breath had quickened. His eyes moved over the locket as if it were a ghost. That locket. Each word was carved from stone. Where did you come by it? It was my mother's, Your Grace. Her heart was slamming now. I have had it all my life. I did not steal it. I swear it upon. Open it, my lord. Open it. His voice cracked, just slightly on the second word, and that crack frightened her more than any shout could have. This was not the anger of a master toward a servant. This was something else, something raw. Her fingers trembled so badly she could scarcely work the little clasp. At last it sprang open. She held it up, and the Duke of Ellsworth looked down at the fading half of a woman's painted face, and the lock of dark hair, and all the color drained from him, as though someone had opened a vein. For a long moment he did not breathe at all. Then he turned, without a word to her, to the butler standing rigid by the door. "Grantham," he said, "send the carriage away, bar the gates. No one enters this house, and no one leaves it, until I say otherwise." His eyes came back to Clara, dark and unreadable and burning, least of all her, and the great oak doors, which had stood open to the winter morning, swung slowly, heavily shut, and the bolt slid home with a sound like a heart stopping. Clara stood in the middle of the marble hall, the locket open in her shaking hand, and understood with perfect, terrible clarity that she was not going anywhere at all, and that she had absolutely no notion why. They put her in a small parlor off the library, warm with a good fire, with tea she did not touch, and a footman at the door who would not meet her eyes. She sat very still on the edge of a brocade chair and listened to the house move around her. Hurried steps, low voices, the grinding of the gate chains being drawn, barred in, held, like a prisoner, or like something precious, and she could not have said which was worse. When at last the door opened, it was the Duke. He had put on his coat now, and mastered his face, but he could not quite master his eyes. They kept returning to the locket at her throat, as a tongue returns to a broken tooth. "You will forgive the manner of this," he said, which was not an apology. He remained standing, one hand on the mantel, his back half to the fire. "Tell me your name, your whole name. Clara Fenwick. Your Grace. Fenwick." He turned the word over, as though tasting it for poison. "And your mother?" "Eleanor Fenwick. She died when I was 9, of a fever, in the town of Marbury, where she kept a small school for the children of tradesmen." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "She had no family that I ever knew. She never spoke of where she came from. I have wondered all my life." Something moved behind the Duke's eyes, a swift, hard flinch, quickly hidden, and the locket was hers. She wore it always. On the night she died, she pressed it into my hand and made me promise to keep it, to never sell it, however hungry I grew. Clara lifted her chin. "I have kept that promise, my lord. Through years, I would not care to describe to you, whatever you believe I have done. I do not believe you have done anything." He said it roughly, almost angrily, and pushed off from the mantel and paced to the window, where the winter light caught the grey at his temples. "That is precisely the difficulty." She waited. She had learned that silence drew more from a proud man than any question. "That miniature in your locket," he said at last, without turning. "The woman in it. I know her face. I have a portrait of her, full and whole, hanging in the long gallery of this house." His hand closed on the window frame. "Her name was Arabella Vane. She was my mother's younger sister, my aunt." Clara's breath left her. "She vanished from this house 26 years ago," the Duke went on, low and even, as though reciting something he had told himself 1,000 times in the dark. "Before I was of an age to remember her well, there was a scandal. The details were burned out of the family record before I was old enough to read them. She was cast out, disowned. Her name was struck from the Bible and forbidden at this table. My grandfather went to his grave, having spoken it only once, to curse it." He turned then and looked at Clara, and there was something in his face she had never expected to see there. A terrible, wary hope, held down hard, like a man refusing to believe in a rescue for fear of the fall. She was never heard from again. It was given out that she died abroad, and I have wondered, since I was a boy, what became of her, and why a whole house should be made to hate a woman none of them could name. He crossed the room and stopped before her, and to Clara's astonishment, he went down on one knee so that his eyes were level with hers, and reached out, not to touch her, but to look, close, at the open locket in her hands. "That is the missing half of a portrait," he said quietly. "I would swear my life upon it. And the hair is dark, like hers." His gaze rose to Clara's face, searching it feature by feature, her brow, the line of her jaw, the set of her mouth, and she felt the look like a hand laid against her skin, and her breath caught in her throat, and she could not have said why. "And you have her eyes, Miss Fenwick. I have looked at that portrait every day of my life. You have her eyes exactly." The fire cracked. Somewhere far off in the great cold house, a clock struck the half hour, and Clara Fenwick, who had been a governess with nothing to her name but a promise and a locket, sat frozen in a duke's parlor and felt the whole shape of her life begin, silently, to come apart. "Then who?" she whispered. "Am I?" The Duke of Ellsworth rose slowly to his feet, and for the space of a heartbeat, something almost gentle crossed his ruined, guarded face. "That," he said, "is what neither of us is leaving this house until we learn." The days that followed were the strangest of Clara's life. She was not a governess anymore. Lady Beatrice's care was given over to the nurse, and yet she was not a guest, and certainly not a prisoner, though the gates stayed barred and no letters left the house. She was something without a name, moved into a fine chamber in the family wing, with a fire kept always lit, given gowns that had belonged to no one the servants would name, and left, for long hours, entirely alone with the great silent house and the mystery of herself. The Duke had sent riders, quietly, to Marbury, to the parish registers, to an old family solicitor in London, whose discretion he trusted. It would be weeks before any of them returned, and in the meantime, whatever wall he had built around himself, these many years began, by slow degrees, to develop cracks. It began in the long gallery. She had gone there on the third evening, drawn by something she could not name, and found the portrait at last, Arabella Vane, painted at perhaps 18, in the fashion of 30 years gone, with dark hair and a spray of white roses at her breast, and eyes that were, beyond any denying now, Clara's own. She stood before it a long time in the failing light, and did not hear the Duke come in until he spoke from the shadows behind her. "I used to come here as a boy," he said, "and stand where you are standing, and wonder what she had done that was so terrible it must never be spoken." He came to stand beside her, closer than propriety allowed, both of them looking up at the painted face. "They told me she was wicked, that she had shamed us. I believed it, because I was a child and had no reason not to." His voice roughened. "I have since come to distrust everything this family taught me to believe about the people it decided to destroy." Clara glanced at his profile in the candlelight, hard and shadowed, and something in his tone made her ask what she would never otherwise have dared. "You speak as one who was destroyed himself, my lord." For a long moment she thought she had gone too far. His jaw tightened. His hand curled at his side. "My marriage," he said at last, so low she barely heard it, "was arranged when I was 20 and she was 17, by fathers who wished to join two fortunes. We did not love one another. We scarcely knew one another. I was cold to her because I did not know how to be otherwise. I had been raised in this house, Miss Fenwick, where feeling was a kind of weakness, and warmth, a thing to be beaten out of a boy." He drew a slow breath. She grew unhappy, then desperate. "And 3 years ago, on a grey morning, she took a horse she could not manage, out onto the frozen high moor, against every warning, and the ice gave way at the beck, and she did not come home." His eyes closed briefly. "The world says I killed her with my coldness. I have never troubled to argue, because in the only way that matters, the world is right. I did not love her, and she died knowing it. That is the wound I carry, not grief, guilt. I made a living woman feel unwanted under my own roof, and I could never take it back." The confession hung in the air between them, terrible and bare. Clara understood, all at once, why he was feared and pitied in equal measure, and why the house was so cold, and why a child cried for a governess, because her own father did not know how to hold her. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her bare hand over his where it rested on the gallery rail. He went very still, In a world where a glove touch between strangers was scandal, a bare hand upon a bare hand was very nearly ruin, and neither of them moved to end it. She felt the warmth of him, the sudden hard leap of his pulse beneath her fingers, and her own breath came short and quick. "You were a frightened boy, raised by cruel men," she said softly. "That is not the same as a murderer, my lord, and I think you know it, or you would not have spent 3 years punishing yourself, instead of loving the daughter she left you." He looked down at her hand upon his, as though he could not comprehend it. When his eyes rose to hers, they were bright and stricken, and for one suspended instant, the whole cold length of the gallery seemed to lean in around them, and Clara felt herself sway toward him, or him toward her. She could not tell. Then bootsteps sounded in the corridor, and a footman's cough, and the Duke stepped back so sharply the moment shattered like dropped glass. He bowed, stiff and formal, all his walls flung up again. "Forgive me," he said. "I have kept you from your rest." And he was gone down the gallery, quick and silent, leaving Clara alone before the portrait of the woman with her own eyes, her bare hand still warm where it had lain over his, her heart beating so hard she pressed her palm to it, as if to keep it in her breast. She did not sleep that night. She lay awake and listened to the wind off the moor and understood, with a fear far greater than any the barred gates had given her, that she was in danger now of something no bolt could keep out. After the gallery, they no longer pretended, not to feeling, that they both denied with everything they had, but to solitude. The Duke, who had taken his meals alone for 3 years, began to appear at the supper table. He took to walking with her in the frost-white gardens in the mornings, at first upon the pretext of discussing the search, then upon no pretext at all. He brought Lady Beatrice down from the nursery, awkward and unpracticed, and Clara watched a hard man learn, clumsily and by inches, to sit on the floor of the schoolroom and be a father to his own child. And something in her chest ached sweetly every time the little girl's laughter rang out where the house had known only silence. "You are undoing me, Miss Fenwick," he told her once, low, watching Beatrice arrange her wooden animals across his knee. 26 years, this house taught me to feel nothing. You have unmade the lesson in a fortnight." "I have taught your daughter her letters," Clara answered, though her colour rose. "The rest you did yourself." But the world beyond the barred gates had not forgotten Ellsworth Hall. Word travels, in a county, of a house shut up and a governess kept behind bolted doors. And there was one man to whom that word carried a particular alarm, Sir Roderick Vane, the Duke's own cousin, a lean, smiling, well-dressed man who had spent his life a half-step from a fortune that was not quite his, for he was the nearest male heir, should the Duke die without a son, and the Duke had no son, only a daughter who could not inherit the title or the greater part of the entailed estate. He arrived at the gates on the 10th day and would not be turned away, and because he was blood, the Duke received him. Clara, from the schoolroom window, watched the fine curricle come up the drive and felt, without knowing why, a cold finger trace her spine. She learned the shape of the thing that evening from the Duke, whose face when he came to her was grim as she had ever seen it. "My cousin has heard I keep a young woman here who wears the face of Arabella Vane," he said. "He came to see for himself, and now he is very frightened, though he smiles and smiles." He stood before the fire, hands clasped hard behind his back. "You must understand what you may be, Clara." It was the first time he had used her name, and neither of them marked it aloud. "Arabella did not vanish for a nameless scandal. I have learned more this fortnight than my family let slip in a generation. She was with child when she was cast out, and unmarried, or so they said. But my grandfather's solicitor kept papers he ought to have burned, and among them is the record of a marriage, a quiet marriage, before she was disowned, to a gentleman of no fortune the family deemed beneath her. A lawful marriage, Clara, which means her child was no bastard at all." Clara's hands had gone to ice in her lap. "And that child, if your mother was that child, Eleanor, born in secret and given a common name to hide her, then she was Arabella's lawful daughter. And you," he stopped, his throat worked, "you are Arabella's lawful granddaughter. You carry Vane blood, legitimate and undenied. And there is property, Clara, an estate settled upon Arabella's issue, by an aunt who defied the family and died before they could stop the bequest. Land and money, held in trust these 26 years for an heir everyone believed dead. His eyes met hers, dark and steady. An heir who displaces my cousin entirely, who stands between Roderick Vane and everything he has spent his life waiting to inherit. The fire cracked. Clara understood, and the understanding was cold as the moor wind. "He means to be rid of me," she whispered. "He means to prove you a fraud, or a nobody, or worse. He has already begun." He spoke tonight, all silk and concern, of how convenient it is that a penniless governess should turn up wearing the right face and the right trinket, and how the world will say, "I have been gulled by a clever adventuress, or bewitched by a pretty one." The Duke's jaw set. "He will ruin your name before you can claim it. He will make the ton laugh at you and pity me. And if that fails," he did not finish. He did not need to. A man who stood to lose a fortune, in a house full of stairs and horses and frozen becks where women had drowned before, did not need his threats spelled out. Clara rose. She was trembling, but she made herself stand straight, as she had stood in the marble hall on the morning everything changed. "Then send me away tonight, my lord," quietly, before he can act. "I have lived my whole life as no one. I know how to be no one again. I would rather that than bring ruin down upon you and Beatrice." "No." The word came out of him like something breaking loose. He crossed the room and took her by the shoulders. Bare hands, no gloves, his grip warm and hard and utterly improper, and Clara's breath stopped in her chest. "No. I have spent 3 years letting a woman I ought to have protected walk out into the cold alone, and I have hated myself every hour since. I will not do it again. Not to you." His voice dropped, ragged. "Especially not to you." They stood so close she could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. His eyes moved over her face, and hers over his, and the whole barred, silent house seemed to hold its breath around them. "You should let me go," she said, and it came out barely a whisper. "You have every reason. I am nothing to you. A governess, a stranger with a stolen face. You are not nothing to me." His thumb moved, once, against her shoulder. "You have not been nothing to me since the moment you refused to weep in my hall." He was so close now that his breath stirred the loose hair at her temple. "God help me, Clara. I do not know when it happened, but somewhere in these 10 days, you have become the only thing in this house I cannot bear to lose." A knock fell upon the door, sharp and deliberate. They sprang apart. The Duke turned to the fire, his hands closing at his sides, and Clara pressed her own trembling hands to her burning cheeks. And when the footman entered with word that Sir Roderick begged a moment of his Grace's time before he retired, neither of them was looking at the other at all. But the words hung in the room after the door closed, unretracted, unfinished, and Clara carried them up to her chamber like a live coal cupped in her hands. "The only thing in this house I cannot bear to lose," and did not know whether they would save her or destroy them both. Sir Roderick did not retire. He worked. Within a week, it was everywhere. A whisper became a rumour, became a paragraph in a scandal sheet, that the widowed Duke of Ellsworth, mad with grief and solitude, had shut himself up with a scheming servant girl who claimed a noble birth she could never prove, that he had barred his gates against decent society to hide his disgrace, that a designing creature had wormed her way into a grieving man's confidence to steal a fortune and a name. Clara's own face, described, exaggerated, sneered at, was the talk of every drawing room within 40 miles, and beyond. Invitations ceased. Old friends of the family wrote cold letters of concern, and through it all Sir Roderick smiled, and called upon the neighbours, and let it be known, with the gentlest reluctance, that he feared his poor cousin had quite lost his reason. The Duke's solicitor sent word that the marriage record had gone missing from the London chambers, stolen, almost certainly. The single document that could prove Arabella's marriage lawful, and Clara's blood legitimate, had vanished. "Then it is my word against theirs," Clara said, "and I have no word at all. I am exactly what he says I am. A governess with a locket." She was very calm, the way she was always calm when the floor gave way beneath her. "You must think of Beatrice, my lord, and of yourself. There is still time to be rid of me and mend it. Marry a lady of spotless name. Give the ton a story it can forgive." The Duke looked at her across the library for a long, long moment. And then he laughed, a low, disbelieving, almost despairing sound, from a man who had forgotten how. "You truly do not understand," he said, "what you are to me." He crossed to her, he took her hands, and this time, when his eyes searched her face, there was nothing guarded left in his own. Every wall was down, every shadow gone, and what remained was so open and so unmistakable that Clara's heart turned over in her breast. "Let them talk," he said. "Let them write their filthy little paragraphs. Let my cousin smile until his face cracks. I have spent my whole life afraid, of feeling, of scandal, of being my grandfather's grandson, and it has cost me a wife I might have loved, and 3 years I can never have back, and every warm thing this house was ever meant to hold. I am done being afraid, Clara." His hands tightened around hers. "I do not want a lady of spotless name. I want the woman who taught my daughter to laugh and taught me to sit on a nursery floor. I want the woman who put her bare hand over mine and told me I was not a murderer when the whole world says I am. I do not care what you can prove. I know who you are. You are the woman I love, and I mean to say so before the entire county, and let them make of it what they will." Clara could not breathe. "You cannot," she whispered. "The scandal. Beatrice, your name." "Damn my name," he said it gently, which was somehow more shocking than any shout. "It is a cold thing, my name. It has never made anyone happy, least of all me." He lifted her hands and pressed them, both of them, against his heart, where she could feel it pounding. "There is a ball at Ashcombe on Thursday, the whole county in one room. My cousin at the center of it, holding court over my ruin. I will take you there on my arm, Clara Fenwick, before all of them, and I will tell the truth of you and the truth of my own heart, and if they wish to cut us, let them cut us together." His voice dropped and roughened and grew unbearably tender. "Only tell me you will come. Tell me you will stand beside me. Everything else I can bear, but not the losing of you. Never again the losing of you." And Clara, who had walked into this house a governess with nothing, and been made a prisoner, and then a mystery, and then, impossibly, a woman loved. Clara looked up into the face of the Duke of Ellsworth and felt the last of her careful calm give way at last, not to fear, but to a joy so fierce it frightened her. "I will come," she said. The doors of Ashcombe's ballroom stood open to the winter night, and every candle in Christendom seemed to burn within. The whole county was there, silks and jewels and turning heads, the scrape of the violins, the glitter of 100 watching eyes, and into the midst of it, unannounced, ungloved to society's judgment, walked the Duke of Ellsworth with a penniless governess upon his arm, and the room fell silent as a struck bell. Sir Roderick stood near the fireplace, a glass halfway to his smiling lips. The smile did not falter, but his knuckles went white upon the stem. The Duke did not wait to be received. He led Clara to the very center of the floor, beneath the great chandelier, where every soul in the room could see them, and he did not let go of her hand. "You have all been speaking of me," he said, and though he did not raise his voice, it carried to the farthest corner, for no one dared so much as breathe. "And of this lady I have come tonight, to save you the trouble of guessing, and to give you the truth, which you may repeat as widely as you please." His eyes swept the room, cold and level, and came to rest, for one deliberate moment, upon his cousin. "This is Miss Clara Fenwick. She is the granddaughter of Arabella Vane, my mother's sister, who was cast out of my family 26 years ago for the crime of marrying a good man without a fortune, lawfully married, whatever certain persons have troubled to steal from London chambers to hide it." A ripple went through the room. Sir Roderick's glass came down upon the mantel with a small, sharp click. "She has Vane blood, lawful and undenied, and a claim this family has spent a generation pretending into a grave. But that is not why I have brought her here." He turned to Clara then, in the center of the silent, staring room, and lifted her bare hand in his, and every eye in the county followed the motion. "I have brought her here," he said, and his voice at last was not cold at all, "because I love her, because in 10 days she has given me back a life I threw away 3 years ago, because my daughter laughs again, and my house is warm again, and I am not afraid again. All of it her doing. I know what you will say of me. I have heard it all my life. Let them say it." His thumb moved over her knuckles. His eyes held hers, as though the crowded, blazing room did not exist at all. "Clara Fenwick, I am asking you before the whole of this county that has nothing better to do than watch. Will you do me the honor, the mercy, of becoming my wife?" The ballroom did not breathe, and Clara Fenwick, who had learned as a child that weeping changed nothing, felt the tears come at last, and let them, this once, because for the first time in her life, they were not from grief. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." The chandelier blazed. Somewhere a woman gasped, and somewhere a fan snapped shut, and somewhere near the fireplace, Sir Roderick Vane set down his ruin and slipped, unnoticed and unmourned, out into the cold. For a stolen document is only of use while its theft stays secret, and a man who steals to murder a claim finds himself, in the end, the only thing left standing in its way. Within the month, pressed by a duke who no longer feared anything at all, and by a solicitor who had found where certain missing papers had gone, Sir Roderick would confess to the theft to escape the worst charge, and would leave England, and would trouble them no more. But that was still to come. In the ballroom, in that suspended, blazing moment, the Duke of Ellsworth raised Clara's bare hand to his lips before the whole staring county and kissed it, a thing no one there would ever forget. And then, because the violins had begun again despite everything, he drew her into the dance, and she went into his arms as though she had been made to fit them. "You are trembling," he murmured, close to her ear, as they turned beneath the light. "So are you," she answered. She felt him laugh, the second time she had ever heard it, and the sweeter for it. "So I am," he said. "I find I have quite forgotten how to be cold." They were married in the spring, in the little chapel at Ellsworth, with Lady Beatrice scattering white roses down the aisle, the same white roses that Arabella Vane wore in the portrait in the long gallery, which the Duke had ordered hung, at last, in the place of honor above the great hall, her name restored beneath it in letters of gold. The estate that had waited 26 years for an heir came to Clara whole, and she gave the greater part of it to the founding of a school in Marbury, where her mother had once taught the children of tradesmen their letters, so that no motherless girl in that town need ever again fold her whole life into a single valise. And the house that had known only silence learned other sounds: a child's feet on the stairs, 2 children's before long, and then 3, laughter in the long gallery, a man reading aloud by the library fire, no longer alone. And every night, when the great house slept, the Duke of Ellsworth would find his wife's bare hand in the dark and close his own around it, the way she had first closed hers around his in the cold gallery when he believed himself past saving. Sometimes, in the golden light of a summer morning, Clara would stand at the schoolroom window where she had first watched this cold house from the outside and touch the locket at her throat, mended now, its cracked glass replaced, the 2 halves of the little painting no longer torn but reunited, for the missing half had been found in Arabella's old rooms all along, waiting in a drawer for 26 years to be made whole. And she would think how strange it was that everything she had, her name, her love, her daughters, her home, had come to her not despite the morning she was dismissed and turned out of doors, but because of it, because a proud, ruined man had looked at a locket and for once in his careful life refused to let something precious walk out into the cold. I've often wondered, as I've told you Clara's story, whether we ever truly know the moment our whole life is about to turn, whether it announces itself, or whether it comes disguised as the worst morning of our lives, a valise in our hands and a door swinging shut. If you had been Clara, standing in that marble hall, with nowhere left to go, would you have found the courage not to weep? Would you have opened the locket when he asked? Or run? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one of them, and I love nothing more than hearing which moment made your heart catch. And if this story warmed you even half as much as it warmed me to tell it, stay a while, subscribe, and let's find our way into the next one together, by the fire, where every ending is only the beginning of something we haven't dared to hope for yet.